Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Cherry Audio Elka-X tutorial series. I'm going to have a look at a few different sections today. We've got the arpeggio to look at, various effects units, and then finally the sequencer. If you're enjoying this series and you want to help support my channel, check out the Patreon and YouTube channel member links below. Awesome way to do that. First things first, the arpeggio section, we can get through this really quickly because it's a very simple thing indeed. I'm going to create myself a simple one oscillator mono sound, and I'm going to play a C major chord. And as expected, you can only hear a single note. If I engage arpeggio, however, at the moment we're in range 2, which means it's going to play the notes of the C major chord and also the notes of a C major chord 1 octave higher. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's playing 6 individual notes, 2 clusters of 3. Knock the range down to 1. Now it just plays the notes of those chords. And the rest of the buttons in the arpeggio section, once you know what it does, they're almost too simple to explain. Down, up and down, random. Let's give it 2 octaves to play with. Hold. Lets me take my hand off the keyboard. Take hold off and the arpeggio will stop until I press a chord down again. And sync will lock us to the host tempo. So all of this stuff is really straightforward. It literally just breaks down any notes that are played on the keyboard and plays them sequentially, one after the other. That's what an arpeggio is. As you'll see a little bit later, a sequence is a different thing entirely. There you specify which notes will be played and it plays those notes in sequence. Different thing. Chorus is very common to most synthesizers. Level 1 is actually my preferred chorus on the vast majority of synths, and this is no exception because it's the gentlest. What it basically does is creates a copy of the sound, offsets it, so it's basically like a delay, and very slightly modulates the delay time. So it's basically kind of like a unison effect, so you've got 2 copies of the same sound. But this modulating delay time in the background is what actually generates the chorus effect. Very close relative to a flanger. Flanger has a little bit of feedback introduced as well, which is basically the only difference between the two. But chorus creates this kind of shimmering effect as opposed to. And as we go up through the levels, that chorus effect becomes more accentuated as the delay offset and the rate of change of delay are increased. So here's level 2, much more intense effect, and level 3 is a very effects-based sound. On to echo next. Standard is the simplest, literally just repeats the sound almost mechanically. You know, there's quite a controlled sort of, it's not a digital effect, it's an analog synthesizer, but nevertheless it is fairly regimented. However, in tape mode, you're going to lose a load of the high frequency and it's going to introduce a very slight variance in the playback, in the speed of the delays to emulate a physical tape machine that would have wearing motors and stretched tape. And you can hear immediately lots of those high frequencies disappear. This was a very common sound in the 60s and 70s. Tape delays can be awesome, and this emulates that. Ping pong is all about the stereo field. It's going to bounce backwards and forwards across our ears. Obviously we've got a time control here. Feedback is how I'm controlling how many of those repeats we hear. I'll head back to standard mode in order to describe what spread does. It's basically going to steal a little bit of delay from one ear and send it to the other. What this is going to do is introduce a stereo effect. We identify things directionally by the time it takes for a sound to reach our ears. If we hear something as being on our left-hand side, it's because it's taken longer to reach our right ear than our left. So if you change the delay time between the left and right ears, it's going to make the sound wider in the stereo field. So no spread, maximum spread. You can immediately hear that stereo effect because there's very slightly different delay times with a very long feedback. I wouldn't say that you can individually identify them going out of time, but you can kind of start hearing them start to play with each other. One delay is very, very slightly ahead of the other. Then we've got an EQ, which is a combined EQ for high pass and low pass filtering. Turn it clockwise. You're going to accentuate the bright repeats and throw the low frequency stuff away. It's going to make you sound like you're in a bathroom. Kind of tiled wall effect. Low pass is a much more natural sound, and something that I tend to gravitate when I'm configuring delay units, because naturally reverberation patterns in the real world do lose high frequencies faster than they lose low frequencies. So you can hear as time goes on, the sound gets duller and duller. And because delay involves feedback, it's the original signal passed back in. Each time it goes round, it throws a little bit more high frequency away, so it gets progressively duller. We all know what reverb does. We've got a room setting, plate, which is a quite brash, harsh sound. It literally replicates a metal plate having a transducer attached to it, basically like a speaker. Imagine replacing your speaker cone with a metal plate. That's what a plate reverb is. Quite brash and bright. Hall, big delay. Let's add more of it. And finally, Galactic, which is a Cherry Audio thing. This is the biggest, most effects-oriented sound, and has that really spacious kind of, almost, it's turning it into a delay at that point. You can individually hear the repeats. And again, we've got our dual action filter. Here's a low pass side. Just getting the lower frequencies, and high pass. Now to move on to the meat of today's episode, the sequencer. In order to deal with this thing, because there's quite a lot of information here, I'm just going to focus in on the sequencer unit itself. It's not a feature I've used in this tutorial before, but you can always, just to focus on a single side, this is the only part of the keyboard we're going to be looking at for the rest of today, so we can concentrate on it. What the sequencer allows you to do is build up to 4 independent sequencers, each of up to 128 steps. So that's 512 possible steps in total across these various sequencers, and they're all individually configurable. So for today's purposes, we're just going to concentrate on sequence 1, but everything that I'm going to talk about today can be dealt with on each of these 4. You can have independent sequencers that you can engage or disengage in any combination. And this is how we do it. I'm going to press the record mode, and the current sequence that's going to get recorded to, which is currently sequence 1, is going to start flashing. It's going to tell me the number of the step. This sequence doesn't currently have any steps in it, so we're at step number 1, and there's a dash to say there isn't currently a note. Now I'm going to play a note on the keyboard, and there's the C input, so that's C3. Now I haven't done anything else, I've not touched the mouse. Now I'm going to press a D sharp, and that's been recorded in step number 2. So I'm now going to program the sequence in that I want to hear. So I want a G, and then a C. Now let's say for the 5th note, I want to record another G, but I accidentally press F sharp. So that's a mistake, I want to correct that. Don't press another note on your keyboard, don't press your G, because that will be added into step 6. In fact, I'll do it. There you go. So this F sharp now in step number 5 is rogue. I don't want it to be there. Well, let's say we did make that mistake and we kind of inadvertently noticed once we'd pressed the next note that I want to get rid of it. No problem at all. Delete step. That step number 5 has been thrown away and been replaced with the original G3. But because we've just interrupted that sequence input, the keyboard to human being kind of sequential input, the next note that I play is going to overwrite the note that you're currently looking at. So the thing to remember with the step sequencer is when you get into the flow and you're pressing all of the notes, don't worry about it. The sequencer will automatically step on. If you intervene at any point and go into manual edit mode, then the step that you're looking at is the one that's going to actually be edited. So I'm going to press a C4 now, and you'll see that it gets added into step 5. Now the next note that I press, it's kind of caught back up again and we're all friends. And the next note that I press is going to go back to standard step mode. So I'm going to press a D sharp. This will be added into step 6. At this point, I'm going to stop and we're going to review what we've got. We've got a 6-note sequence recorded here. I'm going to come out of record edit mode and I'm going to press play. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's the 6-note sequence being played in a loop. I can turn loop off and it'll just play it once. And now we come back on again. What else can we do? Let's get back into record edit mode and review the steps that we've created. So as you can see, I can scroll through these various steps, review them. So let's say I want to edit this sequence. In these two Cs, we've got C4 in steps 4 and 5. Let's say I want to put a couple of notes in between those two Cs. I don't like them playing both together. I want to put a couple of notes in between them. So the way that I'm going to accomplish this is to get to the point where I'm going to shove everything, including the note that I'm looking at, forwards in time. So if I look at the second of the Cs and I click insert a step, now step 5 is going to be empty and I'll put a D sharp in there. If we move forward to step 6, you can see that that is still the C4. So now we've got C4 in step 4, there's my new note, and there's my original step 6. So now this is a 7-step sequence. If I click arrow again, it's going to go around to step number 1. Okay, so it basically just loops around. Don't forget, because I've manually intervened in the sequence process, if I hit a key at any point, it's going to overwrite the currently viewed note. Another way to overwrite any note that you're currently looking at is to simply pull up the drop down. You can choose any note that you want manually, and then there's nothing to do with the MIDI keyboard. You don't have to worry about whether you're in or out of sync. You can always intervene manually. So now I'm going to introduce a new 7th note in front of the D sharp. I'm going to click insert step. I'm going to press G, and there's my new note inserted. Come out of edit mode. I now have an 8-note sequence. Let's hear it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Slow it down a bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You can insert rests anywhere in the sequence. Let's say I wanted a rest in note 5. I don't want this D sharp to sound. Just click rest instead, and now there'll be a gap. The moment I go into record mode, it's basically going to stop playing and put me back in edit, sequence lights flashing. Because there's been a manual intervention, I'm currently looking at step 5. I'm going to press a note on the keyboard and it'll be that note that gets inserted in that step. Let's put an A. There we go. And here's notes, steps 6, 7 and 8, still completely untouched. We have an 8-step sequence. Wherever I am in the sequence, I could be looking at step number 4. If I click add, it's going to jump me right to the end of the sequence and create a brand new step number 9. And then I can create a new D sharp 4 and maybe a G and then a C and then a D sharp. So now I've got a 12-note sequence. At the moment, the sequence is starting every time I press the play button. But if I engage key mode, it's going to wait for me to press a key down. Doesn't matter what key on the keyboard I press, it's always going to play exactly the same exactly the same sequence. You see me playing different notes on the keyboard, doesn't matter. However, if I engage transpose mode, now it does matter. The keyboard is fundamentally based in C1, which is this note here. But if I play any other note on the keyboard, it's going to transpose the entire sequence. I'll play an E, F. Now bear in mind, this is all very well and good and absolutely fine to do, but every time you move an entire sequence like this, you have to bear in mind that you might very well be shifting into an entirely different scale. It can be quite a tricky thing to figure out which notes of a scale you're allowed to play. If you want to be able to play multiple different notes and have everything be in a consistent key. I'll show you a quick example of that. If we go back into record edit mode, there's an A in here somewhere. There it is. I'm going to replace that with a G instead. So now all the notes in this sequence are C's, D sharps and G's. As I'm scrolling through, you can see they're all C, G, D sharp or G. That means I'm going to call myself in C minor. There's multiple different scales I could be in, but I'm going to consider it to be C minor. On that basis, the only other two notes on the keyboard that I can play and have everything still be in the same key are F and G. Basically, all of the offsets of all of the notes that I play with C, F or G will all be in the key of C minor. So there's me playing a C. Here's me playing an F and a G. And that entire sequence is in the key of C minor. Any other note that I play will not be in the key of C minor because the offsets of the various notes will basically take it out of key. It's going to do a modal shift. That's another subject for another day, but I thought it might be interesting to share with you. Finally, we've got a couple of utility functions over here. We can basically transpose the entire sequence up or down, pretty obvious, or we can copy from one sequence to another. We've basically got these 4 different banks that we can play with. Or you can copy the sequence data to memory, switch to a new preset. Let's throw away everything. So I've just initialized the entire sequence and there is no sequence anymore. But if I head into the utility, I can paste the sequence data and it will basically overwrite the current sequences. I can also say paste only the sequences containing note data. So if I had something in sequence 2, it would leave it alone and just basically copy that data across. And now you can see there's my sequence pasted into my newly initialized synth sound. Just realized I didn't talk about gate. This is basically how long each of the notes is going to be. Some really cool stuff to be had with that. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please hit like. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.